Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, now that we are over a week into early access for Path of Exile 2, and we've had multiple hotfixes and a couple of larger patches as well, with a fair amount of changes being made and nerfing the sort of outlier skills that people were using to make the very strongest builds in the game, you may be wondering how things have sort of settled. The ladder race for first level 100 is still ongoing. The current highest player as of making this is level 97, and using a combination of this leaderboard and just my knowledge from having watched a ton of different deep endgame players, I thought it would be fun to rank the classes by their performance right now in both aspects that we've talked about there, and then talk about why things have wound up the way that they have too. As well as usual, I will be showing footage from people playing the classes at very deep endgame progression, and so you should feel free to check out their channels if you have any interest or questions about what their build or setup is. Going from bottom to top then, in 6th place we have the Mercenary, but with a fun sort of bonus note or two here. The reason for this placement is at 20th highest XP amount, the witchhunter Ascendancy for this class has the lowest placing top ladder position of any class, or to be a little bit clearer, I suppose, the top mercenary player is behind the top player of each other class. Don't misread this to think that it means mercenary isn't strong by any means in its best setups. In fact, the main reason for this is that their strongest build was nerfed extremely quickly after the start of early access, much faster than other really strong things were. But even after those nerfs, it's pretty much still just gas grenades and explosions to detonate them as the meta for this class, regardless of which ascendancy choice you've made with it. Of course, with some variations, and while witchhunter is performing better for now, all signs point long-term to gemling legionnaire as an ascendancy, overtaking it eventually just due to the ridiculous endgame scaling potential of having bonus skill slots, being able to reuse the same support gem within multiple different skills, and then just stat scaling very hard. The fun part of this is if we were averaging the ladder ranking for each class between their two ascendancies, mercenary would actually be around 3rd place on this list, because gemling legionnaire isn't too far behind witchhunter on the ladder as things currently stand. Moving on to 5th place then, we have the monk, and this is where I'm taking some slight liberties diverging from the ladder rankings, because the top invoker player is above the top deadeye ranger player on the ladder, but the top charyula player is the lowest ascendancy on the list, and by a pretty good margin as well. You could argue this may just be due to popularity, but to put it in perspective, the player is 201st on the ladder, and the next lowest top player of an ascendancy is understandably blood mage witch, which is having some issues right now, but even that is 82nd, not 201st. That's a substantial difference, and part of this ranking list is based around potential, so even if this is partly due to a lack of popularity for the ascendancy, the top player has gotten less out of it than any other ascendancy's top player has. All of that said, part of Monk's decline is the heavy nerfs to trigger skills within the last week, where all of the cast on freeze, cast on shock, cast on crit, those types of skills got completely gutted for everything except specifically bosses pretty much. Invoker, especially as an ascendancy, has some key synergy nodes with these, especially cast on crit naturally leaned into ascendancy nodes that give elemental penetration on critical hit, one that gives bonus damage to triggered spells, and one that boosts energy generation for the cast on type skills. This led into some super strong setups for the first few days, then the nerf hit, and since then the players have adapted and evolved these setups, and now here is a flicker strike based monk flinging themselves through a tier 16 map with delirium going on as well. As you can see, it's blindingly quick once it actually gets going. It's not literally one-shotting, but it is close on most things, and the full idea here is just working out a way to basically passively generate power charges, and then most of the top monk players are either using power charges into flicker strike or falling thunder to capitalize on the charges themselves. After that, we have the warrior class, and the top warrior player is a titan who is 3rd place overall on the leaderboards, but I've decided to put warrior in 4th overall on this list because of a couple of factors here. The first is that warbringer, the other ascendancy for the class, is sitting back at 77th place. The second is that this seems to be an example of one player performing exceptionally rather than the ascendancy or class as a whole, as the 2nd highest titan on the list is 41st. That said, it is still unbelievably impressive as a class. It has a ridiculous potential for survivability, like standing AFK in like tier 15 maps level of survivability. It has ludicrous boss damage or burst damage potential, the best of this that I've seen happening from building Hammer of the Gods with fire damage and ignite, so that it continues the burst damage long enough to just one-shot bosses. But then the actual clearing ability of smaller mobs has a lot of potential too, specifically with the recent finding of just how strong Stampede can be if you build the right support gems into it and take the Titan Ascendancy nodes that make crushing blows heavy stun primed targets. You get Devastate to fully break armor when applying heavy stun, and Armor Explosion to cause an explosion when armor gets fully broken, and then you just hit Stampede into a group of enemies, destroy all their armor in one go, and watch the room explode. Moving on to third today, we have the witch class. Honestly, this is the part where it was getting hard to rank between them, but after the trigger skills nerfs, witch has still been doing relatively well, with their highest ladder ranking player being 6th overall still to this moment. The main build that people were using before the nerf was cast on minion death, with raging spirits just nuking themselves to trigger skills of various kinds. This just did obscene damage, but was hit very hard in the patch that nerfed trigger skills. Since then, I've seen players trying various different setups, but possibly the most impressive and interesting to me is this tier 16 map being done with 0 active skills on the bar, purely using the reaver minions that boost their own damage and then just running around and hitting the evade button. It's also worth noting that while the top blood mage player is down at 82nd on the list, for a heads up about the other ascendancy, that when you look at the hardcore ladder instead of standard, where when you die your death is permanent, literally 8 of the top 10 are infernalist, witch, and one of the ones that isn't is a dead monk. The main reason for this is witch, while having high damage capability through minions, just has an insane capability for survivability as well. And when you combine high survivability with damage you don't even have to press buttons to achieve, and then you can focus 100% of your attention on avoiding attacks or telegraphs from your enemies. That is simply the makings of just a really strong class. Then up in second, I've got the ranger. The top ranger on the leaderboards is in 8th place, which would make ranger the 5th best class if we were ranking purely off of the top ladder ranking. But of course, there are other considerations, which is why I've got it here, like the fact that the top spot for Pathfinder, the other ascendancy for the class, is only in 14th, which is the highest secondary ascendancy of any class on this list. So if we are judging classes as a whole, both ascendancies, ranger comes out looking extremely impressive here at an average ranking between the two of 11th place on the leaderboard, which is equal only to the class in first. The main reason that ranger is so strong is, to put it simply, that bow skills are really strong. The top deadeyes are pretty much all building around lightning arrow and lightning rod, and then finding some way to work in ball lightning for bonus triggers. You fire off bonus projectiles as a deadeye as well, which is very powerful, and this just absolutely melts smaller enemies like it's nothing. It ruins bosses even in high tier maps. The damage output potential is just absolutely nasty. And then you've got Pathfinder as well, running these ludicrously strong poison focused builds on the side, and either way you run, ranger is just looking incredibly powerful at the moment as a class. Finally then, we have the sorceress, and stormweaver is the ascendancy of the player in 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 9th, and so on and so forth on the leaderboards. It is popular, it is strong, it makes up 5 of the top 10, 10 of the top 20, 14 of the top 30, and then you have a chronomancer in 21st as well. So literally half of the top 30 players are all playing sorceress, which is nuts given that there are 5 other classes currently available. The fact that everyone but one of these is a stormweaver ascendancy specifically though, but then you have a chronomancer still popping in at 21st is also pretty insane, as that makes it the 2nd highest ranking secondary ascendancy for a class, meaning the sort of averaged out power of the class between the two is extremely high, with stormweaver in 1st and chronomancer at 21st. This averages at 11, matching the ranger as well, but of course the class is in 1st because stormweavers are 4 of the top 5 on the ladder. Simple as that. Sorceress in general has a lot of potential power at this stage of the game. Intelligence builds are really good, spell damage is super scalable with skill level, so skill level increases on gear can cause absolutely insane power spikes for these types of builds. And while a lot of the top stormweaver builds a few days ago were based around cast on freeze or cast on minion death or some variation of trigger skills in general, even after the nerfs that hit the skill type, the class has been thriving with various strong combinations coming out. The highest scaling among these so far seeming to be spark-based archmage builds, building massive mana pools, working around chaos inoculation to set life to 1 and give you massive chaos resistance. Mind over matter is a notable to make damage come from your mana pool before your life pool, and then a couple of uniques to give you massive mana regeneration and a portion of damage taken recouped as mana, all of which building a ridiculous set of defensive layers to keep you alive. Or an alternative way I've seen people build this too is to go with the Kitoko's current electrocution gloves, which makes all lightning damage apply electrocute to make enemies just be very much stunned most of the time. And because this focuses on building insane mana pools in general, it leans perfectly into archmage in general, which makes spells cost way more mana to apply way more lightning damage. Stormweaver specifically can build heavily around arcane surge as a buff too, which gives insane cast speed and mana regen potential, and then working it into a skill like spark, which just shoots across the entire screen and watching everything around you just poof into a cloud of dust when it connects. It's just ludicrous to see. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Our first ranking between the classes in Path of Exile 2. Of course, things are still fresh, they are still settling. We don't even have our first level 100 player in the game yet, but I thought that this could be an enjoyable way to spend a little bit of time checking out some of the higher tier players, their builds, and talking about how the classes compare to each other and what their current strengths and weaknesses seem to be. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.